My name is Elena Hart, and I haven't spoken to another human being in 47 days. No, I'm not stranded on an island. There's no war, no apocalypse. Just me, a weathered house on the edge of nowhere, and the kind of silence that presses on your lungs like a slow tide. I came here to disappear, to a place where the walls don't ask questions, and the trees don't remember your name. This house belonged to my grandmother. It creaks like bones and smells faintly of lavender and dust. She died 3 months ago, and no one's touched it since. The mailbox still bears her name in peeling gold letters. The neighbors, if you can call the scattered farms across the hills neighbors, don't bother to check in. That's what I wanted. No interruptions, no expectations, no one to notice the quiet scream under my skin. And for the first few weeks, I got exactly that. Until he showed up. The first time I saw him, he was curled on the front porch like he'd always lived there, like the space had been carved out for his body long before I arrived. A large dog. Golden brown fur, thick and dirty. One ear folded, oddly as if it had once been broken. He didn't bark, didn't whimper, just watched me through the glass of the front door, his amber eyes steady, unblinking. I stood frozen in the hallway, keys still in hand, heartbeat rising. Where had he come from? No collar, no tags, and no roads nearby for him to wander down. Tapped the glass. Shoo. Nothing. I opened the door slowly, stepped out barefoot into the cold wooden planks, and clapped my hands. Go on. Get. He blinked, then calmly stood up, stretched, long legs, big chest, no limp, no fear, and padded down the steps and out into the fog. I didn't think I'd see him again. I was wrong. The next morning, he was there again, sitting this time. Tail wrapped neatly around his paws, waiting. I didn't go outside. I just stood behind the curtain, coffee cooling in my hands, watching him like he was some kind of omen. He didn't try to come in, didn't whine, just waited. And when I opened the door and told him again to leave, he did, but slower this time, like he didn't really mean to go. It became a pattern. Day 3, Day 4, Day 5. Always there by sunrise, always gone by nightfall. I stopped telling him to leave. Stopped pretending I didn't look for him first thing every morning. But I never let him in, because letting him in would mean letting something else in too. Then came the night I tested him. It was late, past midnight. The wind outside had begun to moan through the trees, low and eerie like a warning. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. A soft sound outside the hallway window. A breath. A shift of weight. A tail brushing the side of the house. I moved quietly, barefoot on the wooden floors, peeking out through the side curtain. There he was, lying right outside my bedroom door. Not the front porch this time. My bedroom door. I pressed my forehead to the glass. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. He didn't stir, didn't move, just stayed. I locked the door, not because I was scared, but because I didn't know what would happen if I opened it. And still, he didn't leave. The next morning, I opened the door expecting him to be gone. But he wasn't. He was still there, his fur damp from dew, his body stretched along the length of the porch. His head lifted when I stepped outside, and his tail thumped once. Only once. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something else. Something terrifying in its gentleness. I didn't let him in. Not that day. But I did something else. I left a bowl of water near the steps. Not by the door, not where he could get comfortable. just close enough for him to find if he needed it. And when I came back out hours later, the bowl was empty. That night, I dreamt I was back in the city. Back in the elevator of my old building, gripping the metal handrail as numbers lit up like warnings. 5th floor, 6th, 7th. Then the doors opened, and instead of the hallway, there was a vast field. No buildings, no noise, just wind, tall grass, and a golden dog standing at the edge of it all, watching me like he had been waiting for me longer than I could understand. When I stepped out, the elevator vanished. I woke up with a jolt, and the first thing I did was check the door. He was there. Again. I don't know what changed. Maybe it was the dream. Maybe it was the way he never asked for anything, never pushed, never barked or scratched. Maybe it was the way he reminded me of someone I used to be. Someone who waited quietly for others to come close, never daring to ask for love. I stepped. Outside that morning, barefoot on the cold planks. He sat up but didn't approach. I don't have answers, I told him. His ears perked. I'm not okay, I added, more to myself than to him. And still, he stayed. I tried to lock him out. Every night, I turned the bolt on the door. I pulled the curtains. I ignored the soft shuffle of paws or the way my heart twisted in the silence. But he never left. The dog waited outside my room, all night long. And I was starting to wonder if he'd been waiting longer than that. The sky was already dark when I pulled back into the gravel drive. The old porch light flickered once, then steadied, casting a pale cone of light onto the warped floorboards and peeling paint. I hadn't expected to be gone that long. A quick trip into town for groceries had turned into 2 hours of avoiding eye contact and pretending I wasn't suffocating in the narrow aisles of the corner store. I wasn't used to people anymore. Not their voices, not their questions. Especially not the question from the cashier with the kind smile. You knew up there at the Hart place? I just nodded, bagged my own things, and left before she could ask more. Before she could look too closely and see that I was fraying at the edges. And now, as I stepped out of the car, my fingers still cold from the steering wheel, I saw him. He was sitting by the front steps. Same place, same pose, like he knew I'd come back, like he'd been waiting. A part of me wanted to pretend it meant nothing, to walk past him and keep my walls up. But the other part, the one I couldn't shut down anymore, felt something curl in my chest, something that had been quiet for too long. I carried the grocery bags up the steps, careful not to trip over the loose plank. He didn't move, just tracked my every step with those amber eyes. Calm, patient, present. You don't give up, do you? I said softly. The paper bag crinkled as I reached for the doorknob. He stood, stretched, and stepped forward once. Just one quiet step. But it was enough. I froze. He didn't bark, didn't jump. Just looked up at me with a quiet certainty that made my breath catch. I sighed. Not tonight. I pushed the door open and slipped inside. He didn't follow. He stayed where he was, outside. But when I turned to close the door, he was still watching, still waiting. Inside, I set the bags down and leaned against the kitchen counter, heart pounding louder than it should have been. I'd seen him every day for over a week now, and yet, something had shifted. Tonight felt different. It wasn't just that he'd been waiting, it was that I wanted him to. I made tea, hands still shaking slightly as the kettle whistled. My eyes drifted to the window. The porch light was still on, and so was he. Curled beside the door, tail wrapped around his legs, his head resting on his paws. The image stuck with me, etched like a memory I hadn't lived yet. After dinner, I opened the back door and stepped out with a small ceramic bowl. Inside was a scoop of rice and a few pieces of leftover chicken. "Don't look at me like that," I muttered as I set it near the steps. "It doesn't mean anything." He didn't move for a few seconds, just watched. Then he rose, walked slowly to the bowl, and began to eat. No desperation, no frenzy, just trust, like he knew I wouldn't take it back. I sat on the steps, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, and listened to the night. The wind stirred the trees. A distant owl called. The stars were soft and indifferent above me. The dog, my dog now, I guess, ate quietly beside me. I hadn't named him. Not yet. Because naming things makes them real. Permanent and permanence had never stayed long in my life. I don't know how long we sat there. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe an hour. But when I stood to go inside, he didn't follow. He just returned to the spot outside my bedroom door and lay down, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like it had always been his place. I tried to ignore him, turned on the fan, closed the curtains, put on music, but no sound could soften the feeling that he was there, that he was still waiting, and that maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to be alone anymore. The next morning, I woke up at dawn. The air was sharp and blue. In that way, it only gets before sunrise. I tiptoed to the door, heart strangely nervous. He was still there, eyes closed, breathing slow, dreaming maybe. I opened the door quietly, stepped over him, and sat on the porch beside his sleeping form. Didn't know why I did it. I just did. I sat and listened as the world woke up. The wind picked up. The birds began their cautious morning songs. The stars faded one by one. And when he stirred, stretched, and looked up at me with soft, sleepy eyes, I smiled. Really smiled. And, for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel forced. Later that afternoon, I found an old photo album buried beneath a box of yarn and hand-sewn tea towels in my grandmother's closet. It smelled like cedar and thyme. I flipped it open carefully. Inside were pictures of the house, the garden in summer, family Christmases long before I was born. And then, near the back, I found something that made me stop cold. A photo of a golden dog. Big, calm, one ear folded down. The caption in my grandmother's handwriting read, "Jasper, always watching, always waiting." My breath caught. Jasper, was he? It the same dog? No. It couldn't be. That photo was at least 15 years old, probably more. And yet, the eyes, the way he sat, the silence. It was him. Or someone who had learned from him. I set the photo on the mantel, and when Jasper came back that night, as I knew he would, I sat on the porch steps again and whispered the name aloud. Jasper. He lifted his head. His ears twitched, and then, softly he walked over and rested his head on my knee. I didn't cry. Not that night, but something inside me cracked. Just a little, a good crack. A healing one. The kind that lets the light in. I woke up to the sound of wind scraping against the windows like fingers. The house moaned, literally groaned, like the walls were trying to speak some forgotten language of age and resistance. The old oak out front slapped its limbs against the roof in great wooden thuds, and the power flickered once before dying completely. The digital clock beside my bed went dark. No time, no sound, just wind. I sat up, blinking into the half-light. The air was cold, sharp against my skin even under the blanket. A storm had been threatening for days, but no one had said anything about this. The kind of wind that made you brace without realizing, like something ancient had clawed its way out of the hills. And then I remembered. Jasper. I scrambled from bed, barefoot, heart racing. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. A single candle flickered near the kitchen where I'd left it. The rest of the house was shadow. My pulse ticked in my throat as I moved to the front door. The wind louder now, howling like grief through the cracks in the boards. I flung it open. And there he was, lying in the exact same spot, curled against the wooden wall beside my bedroom door. Fur ruffled from the wind, eyes open but calm. He hadn't left. Not when the wind picked up. Not when the trees bent. Not when every instinct should have told him to find shelter. He stayed. All night long. I knelt beside him, reached out slowly. "Jasper," I whispered, my voice lost under the roar of the wind. He looked at me, ears twitching. "Why won't you?" "Come in," I asked. He didn't move. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pride. It was choice. He was choosing to be out here, to wait, to protect. From what? I didn't know. But I felt the weight of that decision settle over me like a second blanket. He wasn't just a dog keeping me company anymore. He was a presence, a guardian, and some deep part of me believed he wouldn't cross the threshold until I invited more than just his body inside, until I opened something else. I stayed with him, sitting cross-legged beside his body. The wood was cold beneath me, the wind loud enough to rattle my bones. But I stayed. I couldn't leave him alone in that storm, not after all the nights he had waited for me. "Do you remember her?" I asked softly. "My grandmother," he blinked, slow and knowing. "I think she remembered you." I told him about the photo I'd found, the writing, the resemblance, and then I told him about the silence that followed her death. How the house hadn't made any sound when I first arrived. How I'd laid in bed for hours listening for something. Anything. "But you showed up instead," I said. "And you waited. Like you knew." His tail tapped the floor once. The wind howled louder. Around 2 a.m., I lit a second candle and carried it to the hallway window. Outside, trees bent like dancers, and leaves ripped from the ground in great swirls of chaos. But Jasper remained motionless, steady, unmoved. I opened the door wider, just a little. He turned his head. "You can come in," I said. He didn't, just looked, so I sat back down beside him, not asking, just being. We stayed there together, two quiet figures against the storm, bound by something wordless and wild. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, curled on the floor, leaning against the doorframe. When I woke, the candle was out, the wind was gone, and Jasper was still there, still waiting, still watching. Later that morning, the radio announced it had been one of the strongest windstorms the area had seen in a decade. Trees were down, power lines tangled, roads blocked. I brewed coffee over the gas stove and wrapped myself in a quilt. Jasper lay near the fireplace now, finally inside, but only just. As if unsure whether he was allowed, or whether this was temporary. I didn't force it, didn't speak, just sipped and watched him sleep. His breathing was slow and deep, but his ears twitched with every creak in the walls, always listening, always waiting. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat at my grandmother's piano. It hadn't been played in at least a decade. The keys yellowed, the surface scratched. But when I opened the lid and pressed the first note, it still sang. A little out of tune, a little broken, but still there. I played something simple, something soft, something from my childhood. Jasper lay beside the bench, his eyes closed, tail wagging faintly. And as the melody drifted through the house, I felt the tension in my shoulders loosen for the first time since God. Since before everything. That night, I left the door open, not just unlocked. Open. I made a bed for him near the fireplace, placed a blanket there, left a second one on the floor beside mine, and when I went to bed, I whispered into the dark, "You don't have to wait outside anymore." But Jasper stayed by the door, all night long, and somehow I slept better knowing he was there. There are nights when silence becomes a living thing. It presses into the spaces between thoughts, crawls down your spine, curls up beside your fear like an old friend. That night was one of them. Even though the storm had passed, I couldn't sleep. The power had returned sometime after sunset, and with it came the humming and blinking lights of a world that felt too loud again. The fridge clicked on. The heater rumbled to life. The fan above my bed spun in slow, whining circles. I stared at the ceiling, hands clenched in the quilt, breath shallow. Jasper was outside my door again, not because I forced him to be. I had left the door wide open, and still, he chose the hallway. His silent vigil, his promise, his boundary. I threw back the covers and sat on the edge of the bed. The floorboards creaked beneath my bare feet as I stood. I didn't grab a sweater or my phone. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just walked to the doorway, and there he was, curled up, his back to the wall, head resting on his paws, eyes closed but not truly asleep. I could tell. His ears twitched when I stepped forward. "Can't sleep," I whispered. He didn't move. I sank down beside him. The floor was cold, hard, but I didn't care. For a moment, we sat in silence. The house around us breathed slowly, creaking, shifting, remembering. Then I started talking. Not because I planned to, but because the words had been rotting inside me for too long. It happened in the city. Jasper didn't flinch. I was walking home from work. Normal day, same street I always took. It wasn't even dark yet. Still light enough to see the sidewalk. I had headphones in, a grocery bag in one hand. I swallowed. He came out of nowhere. Even saying it made my stomach twist. A man I'd never seen before. He said something I didn't hear. I turned. And then I blinked. Everything stopped being safe. Jasper shifted slightly. Not closer. Not away. Just present. I don't remember the moment it started. Only the noise, the struggle, the way my keys dropped, how cold the concrete felt against my knees. My voice cracked. I kept going anyway. It didn't last long. He didn't get what he wanted. Someone saw, yelled. He ran. I stared at the hallway wall, but after that, I wasn't the same. I looked down at my hands. I stopped walking home, stopped sleeping, stopped trusting everything, everyone. I forced out a dry laugh. Even after I moved, after I went to the police, after I saw the therapist, it didn't go away. It just muted. Jasper lifted his head and rested it gently against my thigh. The contact broke something in me, quietly, mercifully. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I reached for him with both hands and buried my fingers into his thick fur. I came here to disappear. Thought if I could just get far enough away, I could forget it ever happened. My voice dropped to a whisper. But the silence is louder than what happened. And sometimes I think I'm more afraid of never healing than I am of what broke me. Jasper didn't move, didn't lick my hand, didn't whine, just stayed. Steady, warm, breathing, alive. We stayed like that for an hour, maybe more. The only light came from a night lamp in the hallway, one I hadn't remembered turning on. The wind had gone, but something else filled the space, around us. Not peace, Not yet. But something like peace. The beginning of it. The possibility of it. At some point, I lay down on the floor beside him, pulled the blanket from my bed and curled up with it against the wall. Jasper turned slightly and placed his head beside mine, not touching, just near. I closed my eyes, and this time, I didn't dream of the elevator or the dark streets. I dreamt of light, of warm fur and long fields, of my grandmother sitting at the kitchen table, humming to herself while stirring tea, of a house that didn't feel haunted anymore. When I woke the next morning, I was still on the floor. Jasper was gone. I sat up fast, panic rising. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. I ran to the front door and opened it. There he was, sitting in the morning sun, looking out over the foggy field like a sentinel. When I stepped onto the porch, he turned and thumped his tail once. I joined him. "Thank you," I whispered. Later that day, I opened the locked drawer in my grandmother's desk, the one I had ignored for weeks. Inside was a stack of letters, some old photographs, and a journal with a leather cover so worn the stitching had begun to unravel. The first page held only one line, in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. He always knew when someone needed him. I flipped through pages and pages, stories of Jasper, or a dog who looked like him, always showing up after loss, after heartbreak, after fear. He waited outside when my father died. He sat on the porch the day Henry left. He wouldn't come inside until I forgave myself, page after page, entries like prayers, small steady records of something too gentle to explain. I closed the journal and held it to my chest, and I understood. Jasper wasn't mine. He wasn't hers, either. He belonged to healing, to transition, to the spaces between breaking and rebuilding. That night, for the first time, I didn't leave the door open. Instead, I left the door wide open, and then I sat on the floor beside the bed and waited for him. And when he came in, slow and sure, and lay down beside me, just close enough to touch, I whispered, "You can stay, if you want." And this time, he didn't wait in the hall. He stayed. Some doors don't open with keys. Some open when you're ready. And when they do, the entire shape of your world shifts. Quietly, completely, like mist clearing from glass. It doesn't happen, all at once. It's not a flash of clarity or a burst of light. It's the way the air feels easier to breathe. The way you stop listening for the next bad thing. The way you wake up and realize you're not afraid of living anymore. That morning, I opened the door fully, not just to Jasper, but to everything, and he was still there. He'd slept beside me all night for the first time, his body stretched along the rug like a guardian carved from warmth and silence. I had dreamed of nothing. No memories, no shadows, just deep, uninterrupted rest, the kind you forget exists after trauma. I sat up, blinking into the soft light. Jasper opened one eye lazily, then rested his head again. He didn't move, but his tail thumped once on the wood floor, steady and strong. "You stayed," I said. His ear twitched. I think I finally did too. The day began with the scent of wood smoke. I lit the old fireplace even though the temperature didn't require it. Something about the crackling made the house feel like it was waking up with me. I found myself humming. Actually humming. I hadn't made a sound like that, spontaneous and full, in months. Jasper followed me from room to room as I cleaned, rearranged, opened windows I'd kept shut. The house no longer felt like a place to hide. It felt like a place to live. I even baked. Me. Baking. Banana bread. The kind my grandmother used to make when I was a kid visiting on school breaks. The smell drifted through the cottage, clinging, to the curtains and the beams. I caught myself smiling for no reason. Jasper wagged his tail every time I looked at him. "I think we're both healing," I told him. That afternoon, a truck pulled into the gravel road outside. My chest tightened. It had been weeks since anyone drove up here. I peeked through the curtain. A tall man stepped out of the driver's side. Tan jacket, graying beard, gentle shoulders. He looked around, uncertain, then approached the porch slowly with something in his hand. Jasper didn't bark. He stood but didn't growl, just watched. I opened the door cautiously. The man tipped his cap. "You must be Elena." I hesitated. "Yes. I'm Henry Wallace. Used to be friends with your grandmother. Lived down the valley. Moved into town a few years ago. I was going through some of my things and found this." He held out a small, faded photo. It was of my grandmother and Jasper. The same folded ear. The same gaze. Same golden fur, though younger. In the photo, she was sitting on the porch steps, smiling into the sun, her hand on his head like she always knew he'd be there. "This was taken almost 20 years ago," Henry said softly. But I looked at Jasper, then back at the photo. "It can't be him." Henry smiled faintly. "That's what I used to think too. But I've seen that dog show up for a lot of people over the years, always after something hard. He never stays too long. Just long enough." "Long enough for what?" I asked. "To help them open the door again," he said. And then, tipping his hat again, he turned and left. I stood there for a long time after the truck disappeared, holding the photo, looking at Jasper. He was sitting quietly beside the porch swing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The fog was rolling in again. That evening, the air was thick with quiet. Jasper wouldn't come inside. I called softly from the doorway. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just sat like a statue, tail still, ears alert, staring toward the darkening tree line. I stepped out barefoot, the earth cool beneath my feet. "What is it?" I asked, approaching him. He looked up at me, and in that look, I saw it. It was time. Then a realization was like a slow ache spreading through my chest. "You're leaving, aren't you?" He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. This was what he'd done for others before me. He came when the silence was too heavy, stayed until it became light, and then he let them stand on their own. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch beside him, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fog rise and fall like breath. I talked to him, told him what I hadn't told anyone else, about the therapy I never finished, the man whose face I never saw clearly, the way I had blamed myself, over and over, until my voice inside stopped defending me. He listened, the way only he could. And as the sky began to bleed into gray and blue and gold, I leaned over, kissed the top of his head and whispered, "Thank you." When the sun rose fully, he was gone. No paw prints, no sound, no bark goodbye, just absence, just peace, and the space where something sacred had once sat. I didn't cry. Not this time, because I knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. He had waited outside my room all night long, waited for me to open the door. Not just the wooden one, the real one. And now that I had, he didn't need to wait anymore. Epilogue. 6 months later. The cottage has changed. The walls are painted. There's music now, laughter sometimes. Visitors, too. I've started teaching piano lessons to a few kids from town. Their parents come early to pick them up and linger over tea and banana bread. I've even joined the Saturday market with my baked goods. The door stays open most days, windows too. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind picks up and the porch creaks, I swear I hear the soft padding of paws. But when I look, there's nothing, just the wind, just the stars, just the quiet that no longer frightens me. And that's enough, because I know he's still out there, and wherever he goes next, he'll be waiting.